Nick, please tell us a little bit about your experience. I want to give everyone a little bit of background and context. Is Nick works in the entertainment industry and he's a yoga teacher. And he was a yoga teacher when I did my 300-hour training. And Nick was a mentor to me during that training, and he taught pranayama amongst many other things. And he has some wonderful insight. But if you could tell everybody a little bit more about your background in entertainment and how that kind of relates to the conversation, that would be really great.
Sure. So I'm a Tony-winning producer, a filmmaker, a writer. I tell stories basically, and I help heart-centered entrepreneurs, especially online entrepreneurs. I've been in the online space for several years before all of this happened. I help them tell their stories so they can connect with their audience and have massive impact in the world. That's ultimately what I do. So I've been in the entertainment industry for 30 some years. I know, 30 years, and maybe longer than you've been born, right? And then I've been teaching yoga and meditation, pranayama, for well over a decade. So since we're on my page too, why don't you tell everyone who you are?
Yeah, so I am Jesal Parikh, like I said. I have been a yoga teacher since 2010, and I did my first training in India, and then I came over to the US came back to the US, I should say. I lived in New York for most of my adult life since college. And I did a 300-hour training. We won't say where because we're going to talk a little bit about that place. But I did a 300-hour training. Like I said, I met Nick in that training. He was my teacher and mentor in that training. And then since then, I've done all sorts of random training and studies. I love to talk about movement science and anatomy. That's one of the things that I'm really passionate about. And then lately, I've been talking more about social justice issues and equity in yoga spaces, racism, cultural appropriation, fair pay, all of those things. And so I started a podcast with my friend Jesal Patel, and we have the Yoga is Dead podcast. And then my personal brand is Yoga Walla, where I work to have some difficult conversations around race, etc., but also around like narcissism and things that I've experienced in my life. And then also I work to uplift and champion other people too in their work.
Yeah, which I just adore. I freaking adore it. So if you're here, give us a wave, a hi, a hello, something in the chat so that we know that you're here and we can connect with you and take your questions, of course, as well. So let's talk about how you called me.
Where we got.
Yeah, how you called me and why.
I called you because I had been working for a training program, teaching, like I said, movement science and anatomy as part of the program. And there came a point where there was a discussion about taking some of the classes online so that students could better access those classes in their ongoing education, but also if they needed to make up hours and things like that. And so the discussion was actually to film separate classes, but what ended up happening is that training program wanted to film a live class that I was teaching. And then they presented me with a video release form. And so I saw the release form and my initial reaction was just like, huh, what? It was kind of a little bit like taken aback and jarred by what I read. But I didn't know if maybe this is standard practice, right? Like maybe I was just kind of overreacting. Maybe I just wasn't understanding that how the entertainment industry works or how yoga contracts are usually executed. And so the person I knew that worked in both industries was Nick. And so I called up Nick and I said, Nick, you're also on teaching staff. You're also being presented with this contract. And I know you have the experience and background to speak to this intelligently, thoughtfully, and with lots of having probably come across a lot of these contracts before or agreements. And so I asked Nick, can you give me your feedback? And so he took me through it. And I'm hoping that we can actually just take that as a template, a place to start the conversation, and then kind of talk through it as well and see like, what is it industry standard? Isn't it? Is it not?
Yeah.
So do you mind if I jump into the first part of it?
Jump right in. I love it.
Okay. The first part read, the undersigned enters into the following agreement in quotes with ABC Company, the producer in quotes. I have been informed that producer is capturing footage and that my name, likeness, image, voice, appearance, and/or performance is being recorded and made part of the recording in which I appear, the quote product. And so what I wanted to ask you before we even get into like the other parts of this release is what are those different parts? So what does that mean? What's the difference between likeness and image and appearance and performance? Because they all sound kind of similar.
So a lot of it is legal mumbo jumbo. Now I want to be very clear here that I am not a lawyer. In fact, I contacted my lawyer.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
Let me just make that clear. But basically, that's legal mumbo jumbo for the most part. But basically, what it is saying, the difference really, the likeness thing, is publicity. And this is how like celebrities get paid for their publicity, right?
Okay.
So it's beyond just not only what, because it's saying in the contract, your image, your voice, your appearance, your performance, that's like what you're doing, but your likeness is just like to use you in any way, shape, or form to publicize what it is that that you're doing.
Okay. And is that different from image?
Image would be like still.
Okay, like a still photo,
like a still
as
photo,
opposed to a video or something else.
And this
like
is basically saying, in a blanket way, we can use you in any way we want.
Okay, great. Okay, so then the next part read, I grant producer and its designees the right to use product in any format, now known or later developed. I grant without limitation the right to edit, mix, or duplicate and use or reuse product in whole or in parts as producer may elect. Producer or its designees may have complete ownership of the product, including copyright interests. So that there's a lot in there. There's a lot of density.
There's a lot in there to like break apart, right? Yeah.
Okay. So maybe we can talk a little bit about the words any format now or later developed. So what are the things we need to be aware of, like both from the business side and from the person who is going to be in the video?
Yeah, so basically that is saying that if right now this is a brand new way to put content out, and if something else gets developed in the future, they can use this content in any way that they deem fit forever. Forever. So
right.
they can, and in parts, meaning they can split it up. They can use one part for one product and take another part and put it in another product. Basically, it's again a blanket way of saying they can use the material forever.
Okay, and then is this standard practice? First of all, is this like the clause that we just read through is a standard practice?
It is. It is.
Okay.
But here's the difference, and this is a major difference, which is throughout the entire contract, which is why my eyes are like this, is that you would get paid for every time it gets torn apart or put in any way, shape, or form.
Okay, all right. So, and this clause, there is no mention of payment. I know payment comes up later, but typically within this clause, there should be some sort of agreement about what the value of that is.
Correct.
Do we know what like standard even agreement, is there a standard agreement on payment typically for this type of work? Like, let's say specifically yoga type of work.
So here's the thing, this is the wild west, right?
Okay.
Right, and so we don't, because everything is so new, there's variety of contracts, right? And I actually went and talked to my friends at Broadway HD, which is because I thought, okay, what is really the most similar, right? What is really the most similar is what a Broadway, like a live performance, Broadway performance, what would that be like when it's been being streamed, right? It's because it's not teaching, but it's a similar kind of, okay, it's like an entertainment thing that's being streamed. So I went and talked to my friend, Gio, who's the production exec there, and I got what the contract currently is for them. And I'm gonna read you a little bit of what he's had to say. He said, and I asked him about the writers, because they own, speaking of copyright, they own the copyright, right? They own the material. And what he said was, writers are paid a fee, and net split profit that is negotiated. They don't have ownership of the video, right? They don't have the ownership of the video, and that's where the copyright intellectual property thing comes into play. But they own still their property, and every single time it is played in any form whatsoever, they get a residual check.
Okay. So what you're trying to say here is that the copyright interest mentioned in this clause is very different than the ownership of the video.
Correct.
Right? So the producer can own the video, that's standard practice.
Correct.
But it's not standard practice to own the copyright. So copyright meaning the ownership of the actual material being used. So for us yoga teachers, right? So in the example I gave of me teaching my anatomy course, it would be I still own the anatomy course that I created, but they would just own the video, as opposed to if I were to have signed this contract, then they would have taken ownership of the material as well.
They could potentially, yeah.
Right. So if I had tried to teach that course maybe elsewhere, if I'd been asked to teach in another training, I could then potentially be sued.
Correct.
Right, for that material. So that's something to keep aware of, that like copyright is very different. We should, as the performer, I guess,
the performer,
right, own the copyright, but that it does make sense and it's standard practice for the business to own the video. Now there is a clause in there that the producer has the right without limitation to edit, mix, or duplicate, use, or reuse a product in whole or in part. Is that standard?
Hold on 1 second, because I'm looking over on Instagram, and they're saying that they can't hear you.
Oh, they can't hear me, even though, that's odd. That is very odd. But you can hear me. You can hear me. I can hear you fine.
Facebook friends, can you hear Jesal? I think they can, or we probably would have heard about it by now.
Let's see. I just turned my Bluetooth off to make sure it's not trying to pair to my headphones.
Okay.
Is that better? Can everyone hear me on Instagram now?
Okay.
Nope. Still no?
Still no.
Oh no.
Oh no. They can hear me though.
Yeah, and you could hear me before we jumped on the Facebook thing.
Yeah.
Well, if you could join over, let's just let them know that where we are on Facebook in case.
Instagram, come on over to Facebook at the Nick Demos, TheNickDemos, and come see us there. And that's probably the best way to handle this, since it seems like everyone can hear us on Facebook.
On Facebook, yeah.
On the face page.
I know. Let's see. I'm trying to make sure no buttons are being pressed. I'll like unmute, not that all the things, because it's just my phone just hanging out there on its own. So it's very odd.
Yeah. Okay, so going back to the question, what was the question, the last question that you asked me?
I was asking about the limitation on editing, mixing, duplicating, using, reusing in whole or in parts as the producer.
Yeah, so they basically, that what the contract said was that they could do that without any sort of financial return for the individual, and also that they would then own the material completely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So is that it's standard not to be able to have a say in how it's maybe used or reused?
That is the ownership, like, of that video, like with Broadway HD, with that they can then take it and use it in any way they want. However, you're going to get compensated.
Mm-hmm.
And then that is laid out in the contract.
Is there a way to negotiate that? Just out of curiosity,
Absolutely.
Is that typically part of? Okay,
absolutely.
Great.
You absolutely.
So let's tell us about that.
So in like Broadway or in TV film, you would negotiate through an agent, right? And it would be a percentage. And because, again, this is the Wild Wild West, the percentages are all over the map. It also depends on the size, like anything, the size of your following, the size, like how big of a celebrity are you? You know what I'm saying? That will determine how much pull you have and how much you'll be able to retain of the profit share.
Okay, that makes sense. So kind of like get an agent if you can, or try to
Well,
self-negotiate maybe.
or a lawyer, or just get really good
A lawyer.
negotiating skills. Here's the thing, you have to stand for yourself. Whether you have an agent or not, you have to stand for yourself, because yes, that is an agent's job, is to get you the best deal possible, but they're also going to take a percentage, right? They're going to take
Mhm.
between 10 and 20% depending on the agency or a management. So, sometimes it's better to just pay a lawyer a fee and have them do it. And sometimes you just have to stand up for yourself truly, truly, truly.
Right. And the reason I'm bringing this up is I would caution people around this only because it seems like because it says producer or its designees, it means if they sell to somebody you don't necessarily align with in the future, it means if they reuse it in a way that again doesn't align with the original values that you agreed upon, you might feel that there was some conflict, or you might feel like hoodwinked or something, you know?
And that's tricky. And that is also negotiable, by the way.
Right. Right.
Right.
And
So,
so it might be even in the interest of the business owners, though, to be very clear on what those alignment like principles are, so that everybody walks away happy, right? We don't want people to walk away unhappy that that they did this work and
right.
that now maybe it's being sold to somebody else, or sorry, somebody called me. So, uh, that maybe it's being cut or edited in a way that you didn't think about ahead of time. So just like when you enter any relationship, having the conversations very clearly up front can be useful to everybody, so that everyone walks away happy, right?
Yeah, exactly. Protect yourself. Bottom line is protect yourself. In fact, when I went and talked to my lawyer, and I'm gonna read you what my lawyer said, because it was really, really smart. He said, "Read everything carefully. Do not grant rights. One-time fee does not make sense. Make sure the term and scope are appropriate for what you're doing. If you're creating it one time, you should not only be paid one time. If you're creating it one time, you should be paid for one time. But if it's used more than once, percentages are good. It's what's called a penny rate, meaning
Okay.
$1 per session, or a penny. It's an old school term of a penny per session. That's a penny rate, and you negotiate the penny rate."
Okay. That's good terminology to have. Right.
Thank you, lawyer.
Somebody yeah, thank you. Amanda Schrader, I hope I said your name right, Amanda,
Yeah.
on Facebook said that on Instagram people might have to unmute me.
Ah.
So maybe you can repeat that because they can't hear me.
Friends on Instagram, if you can't hear Jesal, you need to unmute her. That's what we're hearing to help you out. So yeah,
Yeah.
Michael Scott Gordon's here too. And this is not a replay. We are live. It was not supposed to be on my page, Michael. That's why we were supposed to be on Jesal's page, but we ended up here. So we are, so we went live.
Which thank you. Thank you for lending us your platform. We really appreciate it. So we'll continue on. We're at B right here. The C. I grant and we made a little outline.
Yeah.
I grant producer and its designees the right to broadcast, exhibit, market, and otherwise distribute the product in whole or in parts, and alone or with other products for any purpose producer or its designees determine. This grant includes the right to product for promoting or publicizing. Okay, can you walk us through what that section was even about?
Yeah, so basically that's what we were saying before, is that they can use it in any way, shape, or form. They can sell it, they can sell it to somebody else, they can sell a part of it to somebody else. They can use it in any way that they deem to their best interest.
Okay, and the designees means it can partner up with anybody they choose, right?
Anybody they choose without your consideration or consent.
Okay, and this is again standard practice, or no?
It is. It is. Yes.
Okay.
That it is, but again, that is a negotiating, that can be negotiated out of the contract. Like,
okay.
You have to remember that this was created by a lawyer of some sort,
yeah,
who was going for the best possible for themselves.
Right.
And this should be a negotiation, right? This contract that was handed should be a negotiating, and then you would come back with your lawyer, and it would be a back and forth. So this is in the best interest of the producer as far as possible.
Right. Okay. And so we can say maybe, all the parts can be negotiated, but maybe one that stands out in particular is alone or with other products. Right.
Yeah.
Again, making sure that we know what those other products might be, or like try to have some say.
And if it's important to you, who the other designees are, right? That they can't just sell it forever.
Yeah.
Like if you want to make sure that it's being sold to somebody who aligns with your values, right? Then that if that's important to you, if it's not something that's important to you, then that's not something that to necessarily worry about the negotiation, because that's what a negotiation is all about, is figuring out what terms are super important to you and which ones are not.
Okay. Right. Makes a lot of sense. The next part is I have the right to enter into agreement and I'm not restricted by any commitments to third parties. So what kind of third party commitments would restrict an agreement?
Well, let's say you were on staff at a studio, and you are on staff, not a 1099 independent contractor, but you're a W-2 employee, and you are not allowed, based on that, to teach for others.
Okay. So basically all the teachers who are teaching at multiple studios right now and who maybe have a W-2 at one of them, needs to check in with their studio to see if they're granted permission to film for like maybe somewhere where they work part-time.
Correct. Typically it would be in a contract. It would be something written out, or in the policy or handbook of the studio or wherever it is that you're teaching, but definitely check.
Is it also, does teaching for yourself also restrict that as well? Like what if you're your own business?
As your own business, you get to decide where it is and what and how and when and why, which is why my own business.
Right. But if you were like, for me, for example, I have my own personal brand, and then if I were to also teach it as a W-2 somewhere else, is that considered a restriction by a third party to film for the other
only
people?
If within the contract that you have with that third party that you're not allowed to.
Okay, all right. And if you want to work with multiple platforms, like what would that agreement look like then?
Meaning, if you wanted to work for many, many people, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and you didn't want that restriction. How would you then go about rewording this?
Then it should be worded as such, that this is not an exclusive agreement, that it is non-exclusive.
Non-exclusive is the word we're looking for. Okay, great.
Yeah. Again, I'm not a lawyer. I want to make that very clear.
Yeah. Okay, but again, we can start to Google now. Non-exclusive.
But I have read contracts for 30 years. Let's put it that way.
Okay. All right. We're still hearing from people. I don't know, Nick, you can address this because they can't hear me, but I don't know if the unmute thing is working for some of those folks. And maybe let them know we're also on your Facebook page.
So for those of you that are on Insta, you may want to jump over onto the Facebook page if you can't hear Jesal. For some reason, we're having an audio issue there that we're not having on Facebook. So go to the Nick Demos, D-E-M-O-S.
I'm typing it.
Yeah, go there on Facebook where we're having a conversation. Yeah.
Okay. So producer has no financial commitment or obligations to me as a result of agreement. Is that standard practice?
Here is where it is the most egregious.
Okay, all right.
This is where it's like, I was reading everything. Honestly, when I read the contract, I was reading everything. I was like, okay. And I got there and I was like, you have got to be effing kidding me. That was real. That was my response in the moment, because no, that is not standard. When it is standard, and what this is sort of based on, I believe, is like a podcast interview. Like if you're doing an interview with somebody and they're just interviewing you, yes, they can then use pieces and parts of it in any way that they want. They can sell it, they can do it because it's an interview. That's very different than you teaching, than you creating content and putting content out in the world for them to then use in any way they want. This is when I got mad, right? This is when I was like, oh yeah, oh no, 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 no. I won't be taken advantage of in this way. That's how I felt in the moment.
Okay, so you're saying that this only applies to interviews. Could this apply to video interviews as well?
It could, yes. Like if you had sent me a contract for this, or I had for you, you could use it in terms of publicity and promotion. That's really what it's for, but not when you are offering content. No.
Okay. And then in this case, like in the instance that this happened, at least for both of us, like I was initially like, this seemed really unfair, but the business was trying to claim that because they were paying us for our time in person, because we were teaching live and that they were just filming it, that they didn't feel like they had to pay us extra. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Again, egregious. So
okay.
Going back to the Broadway HD, I checked in with them in regards to what the actors get. The actors get 1.5 times their salary, plus a media fee, plus a percentage of every time it is shown.
Wow. So do you know what those percentages, like the range of what those percentages might look like?
It's for the actors, like if you're in, like, let's say you're in the ensemble or a chorus member, it's small, right? But if you are a leading actor, it may be a bit bigger, like if you're a celebrity, like I was saying. And then the writers, of course, get the biggest chunk because they're the content owner.
Okay.
They're the content owner.
Somebody asked us to repeat the phrase. The phrase was, producer has no financial commitment or obligations to me as a result of agreement. So that was the initial phrase. We're saying that that was really egregious, and that actually we should be asking for a percentage if it's going to be, especially if it's going to be shown all over again, like over and over again. So every time it's shown, we need to be asking for a percentage to make sure that that's fair, and that this clause is typically used for interview work, not for content-based work. So if we are providing classes or we're providing some sort of teaching, then it's not the same as being interviewed. The next phrase was, in consideration of all the above, I hereby acknowledge receipt of reasonable and fair consideration from producer. Is this a typical part of agreements as well?
Yeah, that is. There's nothing, there's nothing, for the most part in this contract, there's nothing egregious except for the fact that we're not being paid.
Being paid. So to make sure that, and I mean, but I would say that to again, be cautious, both as the business owner and as a teacher, that the terms are in agreement.
Correct.
And that they're, because what I think what happened with us too is that I wrote back to this individual that sent me this, and I said I wasn't on board with all of the terms, and I was looking to have a conversation about what could happen. Basically, I was saying, let's negotiate. Like, right. I'm not on board with all of these things. Like, I want to make sure that if you sign on some designees, or you're going to use some other product besides my product and pair it, that I have some say and that everything is in alignment. And that did not go over well, and the person was basically never contacted me again, is what happened, and never invited me back to join their training. And so to just be aware that that can happen, yes. And in that case, I was like, all right, good riddance. Like, I don't want to sign a contract. Be forced into signing a contract I don't agree with. Yeah.
In any contract negotiation, you have to be ready and willing to walk away.
Right. Exactly. That's good advice.
That's just what it is, because you can only stand for yourself and what you believe is important. And after that, you have to be willing to walk away and lose the contract, lose the job, lose whatever it is that,
Yeah, in this case, I definitely lost the job. I mean, it was fine. Like, whatever, there's always the next opportunity. There's always the next thing. But it didn't make sense for me to not be compensated for my work. But also, I was also worried, like, well, what if the company, this training goes under and sells to somebody else? And now they have ownership over the video in perpetuity. So that was the other thing. And I don't think the word perpetuity has been used in this contract. Or no, it has. The next phrase, I have read, understand, and agree to all of the above, and that the rights granted producer herein are perpetual and worldwide. So can you speak a little bit to the phrase perpetual and worldwide?
Yeah, so again, that's basically saying forever and anywhere,
Right.
forever and anywhere. And
Is that like
that is
is that
not
normal?
that is normal. Again, it
That is
is no, that
normal.
is
Okay.
not that unusual. This contract is not that unusual, but really the only thing that's unusual is the finances.
Okay. Um, with perpetual and worldwide, again,
Yeah.
what kind of negotiation can we typically
You
see?
absolutely can negotiate this, like United States only. Europe, like there are ways in which you can negotiate which parts of the world and for the amount of time. For instance, like a film has rights, it has European rights, it has Asia rights, it has North American rights, right? And for a limited
Mhm.
amount of time, right? So you can limit the scope and the time, and of course, then each one can be individually, and part of the reason that this is done is that each one can then financially be a separate contract.
Okay, great. Somebody posted the question. It was actually Turlene. Thanks, Turlene. What about rights to a copy of what we're featured in for my personal use and branding? So if you are being filmed for something, can you negotiate then having access to that for your own branding?
Absolutely, that's easily negotiable.
That's easily negotiable.
Mhm.
Okay, great.
Absolutely.
But you have to have that in an agreement,
It has
right?
to be in writing, or you cannot use it. Now, here's the thing: in this day and age, who doesn't want, need, or believe in publicity? So consequently,
Right.
they're going to give that one pretty easily, right? Like
Okay.
they want their brand, their name, whatever, to be out. I mean, how often
Right.
are you told, "Oh, don't post anything on your Facebook page about this," right? And tell it the release date maybe, but after the release date, usually they want eyes to go, traffic to go to whatever it is that they're offering.
Okay, perfect. Shri says, so important to be able to remember our worth and being willing to walk away. Well said.
Yeah,
Great. Michael Scott Gordon says, even areas within the United States. So when we talk
absolutely,
about that worldwide phrase,
absolutely.
like it could be regional
It
even.
could be regional, it could be local, it could be. I mean, you can really like narrow it down as far as you want or as wide as you want.
Great. And Nick, I know you have to go, but we have a few more questions to get through if that's okay with you. It's up to you
Yeah,
how much time you have. Okay, all right.
we're gonna do a marathon. Lauren will be on in just a few minutes. So for those of you that are here for Lauren Armstrong, she's in my waiting room. I've got a waiting room, so it's
Oh,
cool.
there you go. That's so cool.
She's in my
All
waiting
right.
room, and we will get to Lauren in just a moment, and she'll just hang out and listen in the
Okay,
meantime.
great. So we're saying this was presented as a video release agreement. Is that a legally binding document? Is this actually a contract?
Pardon? I'm sorry, I missed that question.
No, it's okay. I know you're managing. You're
I'm
managing the waiting
managing
room.
like 5 things.
Is so I said that this is presented as a video release. Is
Yeah.
that a legally binding document?
Yes, it is. Video
Okay.
release, but video release. The interesting thing about that terminology is that's typically a release is typically for what? Publicity. It's a publicity
Okay.
release. So they were looking at this contract as publicity.
Okay. All right. That's interesting. Um, what if there's no agreement in place and you're recording or you've already recorded? What do you do?
So yeah, good. That's a really good question. And is somebody selling your likeness? Is somebody selling? If they are, you have the right. Unless they have a written contract, they cannot sell you. Let me be very clear about that. They cannot use you without your permission,
Okay, unless they have the contract in place.
unless they have
So
a contract in place.
if they've already done it and like let's say there's a disagreement and you would have to take, if you got to the point where they maybe were not listening to you in a conversation, and you had to take legal measures, the law would probably favor the person, the content creator, not the producer.
Correct.
Okay. And then can agreements be made after the fact? So you've already made the video. Can you now?
Absolutely. But let me say this to you. Make them before. Make them
Make the contract before, but just in case, like because, maybe some people who are on here have already done some work and now are
thinking, if you have, you can go back. But it's always more. You're in a more powerful position before than after, right?
Okay, great. Okay, that's great. It's good to know, and obviously, nobody really wants to get to the point of having to sue somebody. But if if it comes to that, it's good to know maybe the law would be on your side if there's no agreement in place already.
Yeah, and if you need an attorney, I highly recommend media and business attorney Gordon Firemark, who is who I consulted with on this document.
Perfect. It's always nice to have a referral.
And he's familiar with yoga. He's familiar with the teachings, and he's also a media and business attorney.
Great. Does it matter if you're an employee versus a 1099 contractor when it comes to these agreements?
It absolutely does. It absolutely does. So there's an interesting thing happening right now in California. We can no longer be 1099 employees. There's a new law, AB 15 or whatever it is. I think it's AB 15. Is that right? That we can no longer be 1099 employees. We have to be employees, not contract labor. Here's the thing: when you are a 1099, you own your property. You own it. And here's one of the problems with this law in California is that when you are under a W-2, they own the property because you're an employee. So you're working for them. So anything you create working under a W-2, they own, not you.
Okay, so even if you created if you're an employee of a studio, anything that you've created while you work for them technically belongs to them. Technically
belongs to them because you're an employee of them.
Even if it's outside work or like I'm thinking about, for example, my podcast partner worked at least up until this week. I don't know what's going on with that work situation, but worked as a W-2 employee for a studio. But then we also started an LLC for the podcast. Before the LLC was created, does that mean anything that she created for the podcast technically belonged to the studio?
No. I mean, you can have a separate business beyond the one that you have. It just the scope of what you're working on cannot be during work hours. There's like all sorts of rules about it. And again, I was just going to an attorney to have a conversation about that. But that's a separate thing. But basically, let's say you were creating let's say you're a yoga vinyasa teacher and you're creating a flow, and you created a flow class for the W-2 studio that you're working at. Technically, if you taught it at that studio, they could own that.
Okay, wow, that's big news, right? I don't think a lot of us knew that. So that's pretty interesting to know that if anything you create while you're working there or doing work for that business technically owns that.
Technically, they own that property.
Okay. Does it matter if the content is live, unrecorded versus recorded in terms of these agreements?
Yeah. Okay. This one's a little bit tricky. The biggest answer is no. It doesn't really matter, because again, who owns it? You or them?
Okay. So with an agreement, you can even use these agreements for live conversations, for both recorded and unrecorded conversations, because something like copyright might still be an issue.
Yes.
Right, even if it's unrecorded.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, if it's recorded, you want to make sure you get paid for every time that it is being used.
That if there's any takeaway from this for everyone, is that protect yourself, right? Like protect yourself. Know the contract, read anything that you're going to sign, absolutely anything. Make sure that you're being paid and compensated for the way in which and that it's going to be used. And the number of times and where.
Yeah. Laurel just asked us a really great question. Could you create a separate contract with your W-2 employer that establishes that the employer does not own classes filmed for their online platform?
Yes.
Yes. So you can create that.
Yes. I mean, again, everything is negotiable, right? You can come to them with any of this, and I honestly, I would suggest it very much so. I really
So
would.
this is kind of really great for whether you're recording content online or not. If you are signing on to be a teacher for that maybe has as a W-2 employee, to kind of talk about this ahead of time, to say who actually, if I create a sequence or I create a class, who owns that, and you can negotiate that ahead of time.
Yeah, and Scott just made a really good comment too. He said, if you have an existing contract, you can negotiate a rider to that contract. And yeah, that's what we call it in the entertainment industry.
Like an addendum.
It's an addendum. It's a rider or an addendum to the contract.
Okay, great. When you go back to unrecorded content, is there any safeguards we can put in place for that? Or is it just this agreement? Is there something else we can do?
Not to my knowledge, no. I mean,
okay.
It really is, it comes down to getting it all in writing. Here's the thing, most of us, I know for me, I just, got hired. I was so happy to get hired as a yoga teacher when I first started at a studio that I just was like, okay, here I am, let me fill out my paperwork, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't really look at, well, what does this actually mean, right?
Mm-hmm.
So know what you're signing. Know what you're signing. And if there isn't any paperwork in place, be very careful and cautious to know that if you're signing on a W-2 or a 1099 and what the difference means.
Okay. That's really, really good advice. And wait, so Liz is asking, what about studios that refuse to do a contract?
Well, you're a 1099. If you're a 1099, you don't necessarily have to have a contract in that sense because you own everything. But if you're on a W-2 and they refuse a contract, you have to decide what's valuable to you.
Right. And we were saying that if you are working with a platform and there's no contract in place, maybe it's not a W-2 situation, that earlier we said, right, that the content automatically defaults to you as the owner.
Correct. You are the owner if you're on a 1099.
So even if you're
no matter
guest
what.
or whatever. So, exactly. Anything else that teachers should know, businesses should know, and other ways that we can make sure that we have like an equitable partnership and that it's not like predatory or completely one-sided?
Yeah, I think again, it's really about just really reading anything that they offer you. That really have to stand up for yourself, because again, this contract was made by a lawyer to help the producer. So you have to come with the same business mindset, right? A lot of us we don't get into yoga for the business, right? We don't think, oh, right. I'm gonna go make a bunch of money and I'm gonna go create these videos and I'm blah blah blah, right? That's not necessarily why we tend to start. That's not our default anyway, right? We come because we love it. We love it and we want to help people. We want to serve people. But in that process, you really do have to serve yourself and stand up for yourself and be your own advocate. And that's really the biggest takeaway of all, I guess, is be your own advocate.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's great advice. And on that note, I think we'll conclude this discussion. If anybody on here wants, has follow-up questions, you can send it. Maybe Nick and I can jump on again live if there's enough questions that have come up from this conversation. And Nick, thank you so much for all of your insight, your flexibility on hosting us on your platform, with your time, your generosity with your time. I really, really appreciate it.
Well, and thank you for being here, because honestly, I got to introduce you, not intentionally, to my entire group of people. Look, Michael's here, and Amanda's been here, and Janice, and so happy to have you here. We'll say goodbye to you here. I'm gonna turn off you on Instagram, and we're gonna go live here with Lauren, who's been waiting so patiently in the green room. Thank you, Lauren, for waiting.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren.
We'll dance it out. We'll dance it out.
Yeah.
We'll dance Jesal out.
We'll try to get the video or whatever we can do to maybe replay this.
Okay, that sounds awesome. And the replay will be available, of course, at thenickdemus.com. So, okay, here we go. See you later.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, y'all. Thank you so much for your patience with that. And I'm going to hide you. There we go. Bye.